You know, I've seen budgets where people forgot to put in the locations. And I say, you're missing something. The locations, don't worry about that. We'll get them for free. No, you won't. Maybe you will, but what if you don't? You're going to be $30,000 short on your budget because you forgot to put that line item in, where's your insurance? Oh, yeah, well, that's nothing. That'll be a couple thousand. No, it won't. It'll be 6,000 or 7,000. Oh, by the way, are you going to edit this film at the end? Where's your post-production budget? That's a common one. People do the shooting budget and don't put the post-production budget in, which is usually 25 to 30% of the overall cost of finishing your movie. Let's go into the budget. So the budget basically, after you finish, whether top down or bottom up, is going to look a certain way, and it's going to be the number that you need to make your film. Whether it's, like I say, bottom up or top down, that's the number you're going to have to raise. So Sally, I want you to just go through the what a budget looks like. We're going to show you a very summarized version, not the long form. Long form is hundreds of lines. This is a summary version. And then we'll talk about how to get the financing for it.
So you would consider this to be more of a top sheet budget?
Totally. This is what I know what you're going to show. And it's just what I call an overview or top sheet, executive summary, just outlining sort of what it is. Because a detailed budget will have way, way, way more detail in it.
Yeah. So for this budget, this again is for Spine Scam. Kind of how Jeff was mentioning.
This is an earlier budget because this is not at the actual budget number, but it doesn't matter. We're looking at the line items. Doesn't matter what the costs are because they're all forecasted anyways.
Yeah. So these are all.
So let's just go through sort of what the line items are, how they lay out, and don't worry about what the totals are for now.
Yeah.
Because it's changed a few times. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have the kind of above the line. We have different sections. So above the line, actors, crew, equipment like camera lenses, camera support, stuff like that. Audio, light and grip, vehicles, location, catering, supplies, travel, admin, and then you have all your post-production sections here. Kind of how Jeff was mentioning earlier, this budget is based on a 17-day shooting schedule. But depending on different, like, for example, like crew positions, you have some days of prep and some post days, depending on, you might need your art director working, a couple prep days to kind of prepare for your actual shooting.
Well ahead. You need your art director working well ahead. Yeah.
Well ahead. So for those specific positions, we add a couple more days. And then some of them have post. Again, another example, like for the art director, the assistant art director might not need as many prep days just because they're assisting the art director. So we have all those numbers in here. Again, there's a ton of programs that you can use for budgeting. We're using Excel here. It's just easier to switch around numbers. Kind of how Jeff was mentioning, if we want to change this number 17 to number 14, I'm just going to copy and paste that through this whole column. You can see right here how much the total is.
Well, it's all set up on top of the number at the very second line, number 2 on the top left corner. It says number of shooting days.
Yeah.
So generally, if you change that to 14, the whole budget will change.
It did not.
Okay, because I didn't give you that version of the budget. So generally that would happen. I would set the budget that what I set up is all based on formulas and everything would read off of that number of days. So,
yeah.
Okay. So don't worry. The viewers, don't worry about it. I usually set up formulas in every of the columns, but the version I sent to you, Araceli, was what I call it. You basically cut it and paste the values. So the values are locked just for demonstration purposes only.
Yeah. Got it. So we have all that stuff in here. You can see kind of the different equations that we have in here as well. And then we also included payroll fees and fringes, which can also differ depending on what state you're in or what kind of payroll company that you're using. So these are all
or union or non-union. If you're shooting union or non-union, that's the big one.
Yeah. And then this film specifically is a non-union crew. So that's what this all looks like for the crew. And then you can also change it all out for different equipment or camera packages. And then right here, you can see we have kind of the subtotals for each section. And these subtotals are what we're pulling from to get to our total production cost. down below.
So this is a very summarized version of a budget. And maybe in a later episode, we'll go into a very detailed budget, which line by line and categories of expenses and a lot more comprehensive. But for now, for the planning phase, this will suffice. And by the way, in order to do this, you have to have quite a bit of experience to know sort of what things cost, the ranges. So even though the numbers are all forecasted, they're made up. I know from previous experience what the range. Like I said, everything has a range of sort of let's say here's the range of labor. All right. So the low end is this, the high end is this, and this is what I call the fair range for independent shooting. So we're somewhere in the middle to just maybe below the middle. And could it go higher? Yeah. Could it go lower? Sure. Depending on how you want to deploy your resources.
Mm-hmm.
Like food's a good one, right? How much do you pay? Like how much money should you spend on lunch every day for your crew? So a lot of people say, oh, you got to feed them really, really well, which means you could hire a caterer who can do custom catering on set, make it look fancy and all this kind of stuff and have really good meals. But that's going to cost you potentially $25 a person per day. Now, that doesn't go on screen. It makes your crew happy and your cast happy. But, for $12 or $15 a day, you can still get a decent meal, get it catered from, say, a local company. Like even, the most popular meal that we always have on our set is basically from, one of the fast food places, whether it be El Pollo Loco locally or, and one of those chains. They basically, people love that food. It comes fresh and hot, and it's $12 to $15 a person as opposed to 25. That's a decision you have to make. And, meals can add up because it's, say, 35 people for 17 days. You do the math on that times an extra $10 per day. That adds up pretty quickly. So it depends, how you want to spend your money. That really what matters the most. And again, you have to know how the numbers work out, what the impact of that spending is so that you can make, I'm going to say, informed strategic decisions. What else on the budget, Sally?
I mean, I think that pretty much covers everything.
Yeah.
And other than like really nitty-gritty like specifics.
Yeah. So there'll be questions. And again, like I said, there's so many more details. If we showed you the detailed budget, shooting budget for some of these, they're going to be 350 to 400 lines as opposed to 124, whatever number of lines that is. And that's fine. If you're interested and you want to do it in more detail, then that's fine. But it's going to come out to more or less the same thing, and the categories and the summaries are more or less the same. So that's what we call the overview executive summary budget, otherwise sometimes known as a top sheet, but it's not really a top sheet.
For example, so now, more like if you want to get more into detail, kind of like the day of days that I showed in the previous video, you could input each cast member and input the day of day numbers from there. That would end up being a more detailed budget.
Yeah. And you can get way more into detail on all the locations and all the equipment, everything.
So to clarify it for filmmakers out there, when creating an executive summary or a top sheet budget, should you create separate budgets, one that includes everything, including marketing costs, distribution costs, and production costs? Or should you have one that contains all of them, separate ones for each one? How do you kind of lay out your budget so that you can separate your pre-production and your marketing that you're setting aside for after the film, and then your production period, and then also your distribution period? How do you separate kind of the budgets?
Good question. So my answer is the more detail you can provide, the better off you're going to be, because it helps you go through the thought process of deciding what is going to be and considering every element. So, but then at some point you have to put it all together because you're going to have a certain amount of money to execute. So like you said, production, development, and distribution or marketing budget, right? So let's say you've got $500,000. I always say to filmmakers, tuck away between 50 and 75,000 of that to do marketing. So that's going to be your marketing budget. So let's say it's $50,000. So what you really have to make the film is $450,000, not $500,000. And But now you would show that at some point you might have a separate marketing budget that shows how you're going to spend $50,000. But at some point you're going to need to have a summary budget that shows how you're spending 500,000. Everything is consolidated because your investors want to see if they're going to give you 500, where's it going? And this really is more so for investors to understand sort of where the money's going. It's not necessarily for the filmmaker to use to execute the actual production. They'll have a more detailed one. So you are correct. And depending on what kind of filmmaker you are and how business savvy you are and how good you are at doing either Excel spreadsheets or working on one of the other platforms, whether it be Movie Magic or whatever, go into as much detail as possible. The more detail, the better, because it just helps you go through the process. But you don't necessarily need it. You just have to be realistic about what you understand to be the expenditures and try not to forget anything. You know, I've seen budgets where people forgot to put in the locations. And I say, you know, you're missing something. The locations, don't worry about that. We'll get them for free. No, you won't. Maybe you will, but what if you don't? You're going to be $30,000 short on your budget because you forgot to put that line item in. You know, where's your insurance? Oh, yeah, well, that's nothing. That'll be a couple thousand. No, it won't. It'll be 6,000 or 7,000. You know, where's this? Oh, by the way, are you going to edit this film at the end? Where's your post-production budget? That's a common one. People should do the shooting budget and don't put the post-production budget in, which is usually 25 to 30% of the overall cost of finishing your movie. So if you have experience, you know exactly how to build these things. You don't forget any of these items. The detail is great. It's just you have to make sure you have everything in there and it's relatively proper. And that comes with experience for the most part. So even though you can start and do your own budget and probably do it well, at some point you should consult with somebody who has actually made a film and they can say if it's realistic or not. But, you know, like somebody could look at one of my budgets and say, you're spending way too much on labor. Like I can get that at half the price. And I say, great. If you can, wonderful. You should take that budget, cut the labor in half. Just make sure, you know, they're going to show up and they're going to do the job. I choose to spend that much. You hopefully can choose to spend less. No problem. That's a business decision. But don't show me a budget where there's no labor, like where there's no crew. All right. At least put the crew in and just put it at a lower rate or put it at 0 if you want. But at least make sure you've considered it. That's what I'm saying. Just make sure. So everything's in this budget, every element that you need to release the film. Now, this is not the marketing budget, albeit, but we have other money tucked away from marketing because I do it differently. I show you what this is the production budget. Okay, so let's say it's 500. That's what we're dealing with. All right. Because that's what that budget is, 499 and change. All right. So let's say it's 500, even though this movie is actually made for 700, because that's an earlier budget. And I just wanted to show that for demonstration purposes. So let's use the number 500. Okay, so that's our number. Now, where are we going to get that money from? Jerry, you tell me. Where do you get that money from? I mean, rich Uncle Charlie? Does everybody have a rich Uncle Charlie?
Most people don't have a rich Uncle Charlie. Most of the time you're going to have to either go to first off friends and family, but then also the one that you got to really go to is the high net worth individuals that you know within your area or within your group circles that you can kind of pitch your film or your movie to. Not everyone has an uncle that's got the money, but sometimes there's a random friend of a friend or an acquaintance that might.
Okay. So, Sally, what do you want to add to that?
I agree with Jared. I think everyone has different circles. It's just about finding the right people.
Okay. So the major component to financing a film is definitely private investors. I'm talking about a low budget indie film. All right. It does start with friends and family. The number one rule about taking money from friends and family, and anybody, by the way, but specifically friends and family, is do not take money from people who can't afford to lose it. A low budget indie feature film is an extremely high risk investment, extremely high risk. I know all filmmakers have the intention of being successful, making a great film, releasing, making lots of money. But historically, the evidence has shown that most of them lose money. And therefore, if you're taking money from people who are, say, in your close circles, then you have to be very upfront and honest with them and tell them that it's very good possibility that you're going to lose the money, or at least a good chunk of it. And therefore, if they can't afford to lose it, if it's going to affect their lifestyle, their retirement, even, you know, a holiday that they otherwise were going to go on. You don't want to be in that position where you have to look at them every day, or these are your good friends, your family, and you know that you compromise them. So my advice is take a bit, but don't take it to the point where they're going to be unhappy and can't afford it. All right. Now, I would say that with everybody, not just your family and friends, even people you don't know. You make it very clear how high risk an investment this is, and you say, this is what we're hoping to do. And so we're getting kind of into the investor pitch package here thing. So, which we're going to do in another session. I'm going to talk about how to pitch an investor properly. But the bottom line with an investor is don't take their money if they can't afford to lose it. Now, if they can't afford to lose it, then you take it in a certain percentage that you think is going to, you know, be sensible. So if you need $500,000, maybe you're taking $50,000 from 10 high net worth individuals. Maybe that's where you're getting it from. And when I talk about pitching investors, there's certain things that they're going to want to see. Like, for instance, most investors want to see that you have you have your money in before they have their money in, because they want you to be at risk, because they want you to pay attention. Now, maybe you don't have $50,000 yourself. Maybe you only have 5,000, but they want you to be invested financially also, so that your interests are aligned with theirs, so that you're paying attention. All right. Now, there is a thing called tax credits. So I just want to take a few minutes and talk about that. So a lot of people say to me, you know, Jeff, like a lot of states, there's 28 states in the United States and various countries around the world that will give you financial incentives to come and shoot your movie there. And that's true. I mean, I say that because I teach it. So let's look at, you know, a couple of states. So I've looked at Oklahoma, New Mexico, Kentucky, California, New York, Louisiana. All these states give tax credits. And what they do is they say to filmmakers, we would like you to come to our state to shoot your movie because we want you to spend your money in our state, because that will employ our people, and it will, you know, it will have economic development in our region because you're spending money there. So to incentivize you to spend your money, your budget in our state, we will give you back a portion of that money as an incentive. And usually it's around 25%. So they say, come and spend your $500,000 in our state. We'll give you back 25% of that. So that's $125,000. And that's called qualified expense. You have to spend it a certain way on certain expenses. And if you spend it on the right expenses, those are called qualified expenditures. And then they will rebate your money back to you, either as in the form of a tax credit or some type of rebate. And I'll get in, it's a little complicated how that works, but these are real financial incentives. So a lot of filmmakers say to me, I'm going to finance, say, 25% of my budget off of a tax credit. And I say, what do you mean finance? They say, well, I'm going to raise $375,000 from private investors, and then I'm going to get a tax credit of $125,000. And I say, yeah, but that's not going to work for cash flow, because you need $500,000 to make your film. And the $125,000 you're going to get back from the state as a tax credit is going to come after your film is finished. And it could make 6 months to a year, sometimes even 2 years after. So your crew and the people that you're hiring to do the film aren't going to want to wait 6 months to get paid while you're getting your tax credit. So you're actually going to need $500,000 in cash. And then that $125,000 will come back to you, and then you could give it to your investors so you can pay it back. So I don't consider tax credits a form of financing. I consider them a form of revenue to pay back the financing. And this is a huge mistake that filmmakers make, because they don't factor that in. Now, a lot of them say to me, oh no, we do factor it in. What we're going to do is we're going to lend from a bank against or some lending institution. We know we're getting a tax credit. It's bankable because it's from a state government. So we'll lend the money of $125,000. And I say, that's fine. It's just not a good strategy to do that, because the cost of lending is very, very high. And the banking fees and the loan fees and everything like that, not to mention the interest fees. When you do the math on it, you're going to dilute your tax credit from 25% probably down to maybe even as low as 15%. You're going to eat up a good chunk of the tax credit just based on your financing fees. So I think it's better to have private investors come in and fund the entire movie. And then you say to them, only 75% of your money is at risk because 25% is coming back to you in tax credits. It's just going to take 6 months to get it back. So, Sally, you have processed tax credits. Can you tell everybody about kind of how that works, what the whole
Yeah.
tax credit thing's all about?
Yes, so just to start. So kind of what my process was when I was exploring tax credits, just within the US, I utilize, it actually just came out with Rapbook. They have a state incentive tax program, kind of like checklist. If you go to their website, it's very useful. So I have a map pulled up here of all the states, and what I did was we wanted to stay somewhere close to California, so I took a look at places like New Mexico, which has a fully refundable tax credit. Another place I looked at was Oregon, and then also, of course, just to see if we could stay in California's tax credit. But Rackbook is really helpful because they tell you how much you have to spend, how much you can get back, kind of the details where you can apply, stuff like that. So my experience with tax credits has definitely been an interesting journey. So California, so I'm just going to pull it up right here, is a non-transferable, non-refundable tax credit.
But it starts, your budget has to be $1 million or more to even be eligible.
Yeah, their minimum spend is $1 million. And then you get up to 25% back. But the tricky thing with the California tax credit is you get 25% back on your qualifying expenditures. So let's say that you are spending $1 million. A part of what doesn't qualify as a qualifying expenditure or qualifying labor are actors, all of your above the line costs, stuff like that, which for some films can amount to a quarter or even a third of their budget. So that easily brings down your 25% incentive down to 12.5%.
Yeah. So for instance, if half of your expenditures, like your producer, director, writer, all your actors amount to 50% of your budget, then those expenditures do not qualify. And so they're only giving you 25% on the other half of your budget. So now you're getting 25% of 50%. So that's 12.5%. That's where Sully came up with that number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's important to, Rapid gives a good summary to kind of look to see which kind of tax incentives interest you. But if you really want to get down to like the nitty gritty or details of each state's incentive program, I highly recommend going to their each state's individual website and kind of going into the details of that. So we also considered New Mexico, which is a fully refundable tax credit. I'm just gonna pull that up now. So the nice thing about New Mexico is they have no minimum spend, so you could spend $10,000, $1 million, $50,000. Any amount of money that you want to spend for your feature, you can still apply to their incentive program, and you can get again a 25% incentive back on that. In New Mexico, the way that their process works, they have no funding cap on it, anything, which is pretty nice. Or they do have a funding cap, but they've never hit the cap, so you don't really have to worry about, oh, is my film going to qualify? Is it not going to qualify? There are a lot of big studios in New Mexico as well. Like I know Netflix is actively building, I think, like their 7th and 8th massive sound stages. There's a few smaller independently owned sound stages there as well. But the program in New Mexico disqualifies a lot of the big budget Netflix stuff anyway, so you're not competing with it too much.
Well, they have a different, in New Mexico, they treat the big budget stuff differently than the small budget stuff. They have different allocations. So
Yeah.
So it's a very friendly place to shoot low budget indie films.
Yeah, it is a friendly place.
Yeah.
And then they also give different bumps. So different states can give maybe 5% or 10% uplift bumps. So in New Mexico specifically, they give you a 10% bump if you're outside of the zone. And the zone includes Albuquerque and Santa Fe. So I think it's 60 miles outside of that radius.
Mhm.
then you get an extra 10%. So you move that 25 up to a 35% rebate back. And then also for TV shows or TV pilots, they also get another 5% bump. So depending on what kind of film you're filming, where you can film it, is to see if locations allow for you to film outside different zones. Those are definitely helpful as well.
The reason they do that is because they want to spread the wealth. They want people not just in their major cities to get all the jobs. They want to bring it outside of the major cities. So New Mexico is good. You know, one of the things you have to think about when you're choosing a tax credit friendly state is, you know, obviously what the tax credit is, what qualifies and what doesn't qualify, but can you shoot the movie you want to shoot within what they have to offer in that state? Now, most places have major cities. They have all kinds of landscapes and deserts and beaches and mountains and this and that. So most states have that. Even if their cities aren't big, you can fake it. So a lot of stuff, it's movie magic. You can fake a lot of the stuff. And you're not necessarily shooting on soundstage. You rarely, when you're shooting low budget indie film, you're rarely shooting on a soundstage. So it's usually on location. So I'm going to say most places you can get what you're looking for, unless it's really, really specific. Like you need a specific, you know, desert scape or something like that. And you have to specifically shoot in, say, Utah or Arizona or California or something like that. But if it's generic, for the most part, you can find what you're looking for. And then the other thing you have to consider is, you know, can you get a crew? Can you get the right cast to come to Albuquerque? You know, can you get all the resources that you're going to require to make your film properly? So that's a big one. And a lot of people just say, oh, I'm going to get this tax credit, so I'm going to go there and I'll figure it out. But sometimes you can't figure it out. Sometimes it gets tricky to navigate figuring out the logistics of actually shooting your film. So you, again, another balancing act. So I'm going to suggest we stop here for this episode, but I think there's a lot more to talk about with tax credits, which we will do in the next episode, and that will lead us into investor pitch packages. All right, so thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you at the next episode.
Thanks for watching this episode of We're Making a Movie. Make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for our next episode.